sewing friends, it's Carolina Moore here from alwaysexpectmore.com, and we are working on the Gallery Wall Quilt. The Gallery Wall Quilt is now a sew along, and I have two different colorways for you to look at and choose from. One is by land and one is by sea. We'll be working on the by land version here during the sew along, and this is the by sea version, and this is what's on the front of the pattern. They're all art gallery fabrics, and everything is all detailed in the pattern of exactly how much of every single fabric you need. This is what the front of your pattern looks like, and it has full color instructions with step outs. We'll also be going through everything here in the video, from cutting to piecing all the way through the quilt. The whole series is going to take us 6 weeks. The first week we're going to be cutting, and then weeks 2 through 5 we're going to be doing parts A, B, C, and D, because there's 4 different units, A, B, C, and D within the quilt. And then in the 6th week, we will be putting it all together. And there might be a bonus week in there where I show you how to quilt it. I've had a lot of requests for people asking, hey, can you show me how to quilt a larger quilt on a domestic sewing machine? And I can't wait to show you that. So we'll see that. Okay, so you can find the pattern online. You go to carolinamorepatterns.com. There will be a link down in the description below, so you can click that link, or just go to carolinamorepatterns.com, click the patterns link, and you will see the Gallery Wall Quilt pattern. And that will give you a download to all the instructions, including some bonuses that are added on there. And the bonuses are the coloring sheet, so that you can put in your own colors and figure out how you'd like all the colors to work out. And a page showing the by land option for this, and this uses 2 of the other lines from Art Gallery Fabrics, one by Sharon Holland and one by Katerina Rochella, and they're lovely. As well as for the earthen option, I have fabric labels that you can cut out into pieces and then you pin on to your fabrics so that you know exactly which fabrics go where and what size to cut them, and it makes it so much easier when fussy cutting all of your pieces for the insides of your frames. So let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to start by using the cutting instructions to cut all our fabrics. Let's head over to the cutting mat. As we start cutting, I first gather my tools. I have a rotary cutter, and you want to make sure you've got a nice sharp blade in there. Dull blades make you push really hard when you're cutting to try to cut all the way through, and so you'll lose the control by pushing so hard. You want a nice fresh blade. And then I have 2 rulers. I have my large 6-inch ruler, and this one goes all the way to 24 inches. This is fabulous for cutting big strips. And then I have the smaller 3.5 by 12.5 ruler, and this is perfect for sub-cutting strips. You don't need a smaller ruler if you're still investing in your quilting supplies. Get the bigger one first, and then you can always add on with smaller ones or ask for these for birthday or Christmas presents. So we have our tools, our rulers, and our rotary cutter. And then we have our fabrics. I have what's going to be the inner frame. I have my 2 fabrics for my outer frame. And then I have my background fabric, which is this gorgeous Art Gallery Fabrics denim. And this is like, it's like a really buff linen. It's beautiful fabric to work with. And it's going to give me really, really great texture for the background of this quilt. So I'm actually going to set these aside because all of this cutting is pretty normal. It's every day. It's just cutting strips and subcutting the strips, and all the instructions are really broken down in the pattern. We'll go over that at the end of the video just so that you have it, but it's not really, to me, the most interesting part, and I want to give you the most interesting stuff up front. To me, the most interesting part is cutting all of these fabrics, which are the fabrics that go inside our frame. They're all gorgeous Art Gallery Fabrics by Sharon Holland and Katerina Rochella, and the lines are spirited and earthen, and they just go so, so beautifully together. And I can't wait to see this whole quilt done. But first things first, and that is cutting. Although, I should tell you that all of my fabrics have been prepared by pressing and starching. I always press and starch my fabrics before I go to cutting. Then if you are, if you have the pattern I've added a page for those of you who bought the pattern before. You have gotten the supplement, and those of you who've bought the pattern since, you'll find in the back pages I have all of these tags that you can just cut out, and it tells you the fabric that I used and actually the code of that fabric as well for easy ordering. And then it tells you exactly what size to cut this piece down to. So you don't even need to go back and forth with the pattern as you're cutting, because all of your cutting details are going to be on these, which is fabulous. Some of these will be more fussy cut than others depending on the fabrics that you've chosen. If you're going with the same fabrics as me, you're gonna have such a beautiful quilt, and I'll show you how to fussy cut these. So this is fabric 1, and this is Grounded Tiara, and this is going to get cut down, and this one is 18.5 wide by 4.5 high. And the way that I've chosen to have this one in the quilt is that it's going to be 18.5 wide like this, and then 4.5 tall like this. And I want this kind of in the middle. So since I have to cut this to 4.5, half of 4.5 is 2.25. So I'm going to line up my ruler more or less, because that line is curved, with the 2.25 mark. And that's more or less lined up on that 2.25 mark. I'm gonna give it a cut, one smooth cut all the way across. If you can't make one smooth, easy cut all the way across, it's time to switch out that rotary blade. So now I'm gonna cut the other direction. And I don't have to line up with the lines on my mat. This isn't about the lines on the mat. This is about the lines on my ruler. So I need this 4.5. And I'm going to line this up at 4.5 all the way down. And if I've done this right, my 2.25 should also be lining up pretty much even on that line again. There we go. So now I need to cut it to width, which is 18.5. So I'm going to see about where that is on my mat. Let's see. Let's start it right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 and a half. So I've got a little bit of wiggle room to play with here. And I want to kind of center it on there. There we go. So I'm going to cut off my end to square it up. And now I want to make sure that I'm going 18.5. So yes, I counted, but I'm measuring twice and cutting once. So my 18.5 is right here. There we go. So that's fabric 1, all cut. I'm going to keep cutting all of these pieces to fussy cut the ones that are fussy cut, and just go ahead and cut the pieces that are more of like a blender or background fabric that don't necessarily have a focal like this one does. So let's keep cutting. Okay, so this has this fabulous print. This is the Boundless Spirit in Sorrel from the Spirited line. And the first thing I'm going to do is cut off my selvage. I love keeping my selvages for use on selvage projects, and how you cut your selvage is up to you. My preference is to go about an inch into the fabric and cut the selvage that way. And that way I have some nice fabric in my selvage. So I can actually see the fabric as well as the selvage, and then I'll set this aside. And that also gives me a nice straight line here to do my cutting from. This piece needs to be 14.5 inches wide by 12.5 inches tall, and this print is directional. So it has to be 14.5 inches wide this way, because otherwise I'll have my horses going sideways in my frame, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up on my mat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 and a half. Place my ruler. Measure twice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 and a half. Okay. So I'm good. Make sure everything's all lined up straight. And now I need 12 and a half in this direction. So I'm going to line this all up. Give myself a nice clean cut. So now I've got that edge squared up and go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and a half in this direction. And then I'll go ahead and pin back on my little piece. And you can use any pins that you want for this. I'm just using little applique pins because they're cute and tiny and don't make giant holes in my fabric. There we go. This fabric is not directional at all, so I can just cut it in any which direction I want, because whether it's this way or this way, the print is still gorgeous and makes sense either way. So since this is non-directional, I'm cutting the 10 and a half off of it first instead of the 14 and a half. And the reason that I'm doing that is because this is my 10 and a half, and then I have this nice big piece that I can save. And if I cut 14 and a half on it, off of it, then this would be 4 inches smaller and there'd be less, but this is still totally enough fabric to make a cute little zipper pouch or something really fun with. Whereas if it was 4 inches smaller, I'd have less options for what to do with that fabric. So by cutting the smaller pieces first, or by cutting as small a strip off of it as possible, then I leave larger pieces for what's essentially my scrap, but is really not scrap at all. There are 21 different fabrics that you can put in this quilt, but I've chosen to repeat some of them. And one gets cut into a 4.5 by 4.5 inch square. This one I'm getting an extra 4.5 inch square, and there's just enough for me to still get my 4.5 by 4.5 inch square out of this as well. And that one is pretty easy. There we go. Now this fabric, I think the most interesting part is over here. I could cut this as my 8.5 by 10.5, but I just don't think it's as interesting. Also, I feel like this one, to me, looks directional with this being the bottom and them curving like rainbows. But that's a personal preference. So I want to make sure that these pieces are in here, and this one is 8.5 wide. So I'm going to try to see, okay, 8.5 is right here. What do I really want in here? I really want to focus on this. So I really want this kind of about here. So I'm going to go ahead and start my first cut here. I'm going to put this on the 1/2 inch mark, and that'll make my life easier. I don't have to try to move the fabric later. So there we go. And now I'm going to look at it in this direction and see. This is a taller piece, so it's going to be to here. I really like it all the way up near the top. So I'm going to cut this one on the 1/2 as well here. caught a snag in my mat, which happens. Let me make sure I'm closing my blade. And then you'll notice when I move fabric, I'm not moving it like this, and I'm not moving it with my fingers. You'll see my whole hand actually tucks under it because I'm using my fingernails to just kind of scratch the fabric along. And I find that's the easiest way for me to get just a fraction of a movement is just with my fingernails at the tips of my fingers. Isn't that such a pretty frame? Such a pretty design to have in our frame. So I love that. I'm gonna go ahead and pin this. And we just keep cutting. This one's another directional print with my trees going up and down, so I need to pay attention to that. Here's a fun trick if you know that your ruler is 6 inches and you need to cut something 6.5. Just give yourself a 1/2 inch over on the edge. Line up the 1/2 inch marks on your ruler with the inch marks on the mat. And super easy way to know that you've got 6.5 inches. What I have left are a bunch of fabrics that all need to be cut to the same size. And I've divided them up into this pile that all have like a small print or a simple design that don't need fussy cutting at all. And there's 4 of these, so I can stack these all up on top of each other and cut those at the same time. And then these really need a delicate hand when fussy cutting, so I'm going to cut these individually. But there's no reason that I can't just go ahead and slice through all these and cut them 4 at a time. So easy to cut multiple layers all at once and get them all cut. Nice, right? Okay, so now we're going to do these last fussy cuts, and I'd like to show you fussy cutting techniques again as we go through these. We'll start with this, which is really similar to that fabric one that we cut. It's got a long strip across it, and this one's getting cut to 4.5. So again, I could see if I could find the middle and put that at 2.25, but this doesn't really have a defined middle. So instead, what I'm going to do is put the bottom line along this bottom edge here and see that it's 3 inches. I'm cutting this to 4.5, so that gives me 1.5 inches or 6 quarters. So I want 3 of those quarters on the bottom and 3 of those quarters on the top to cut to 4.5. There we go, one side. And now when I cut this to 4.5, look at that. And I'm not so worried about this direction because it doesn't have a large repeat. The repeat is pretty small. So I'll just chop it there, pivot, and chop it there. Okay. This one is similar to the first one because I want to fussy cut this flower in the center. So I'm going to go to my 2.25 mark, line it up with the center of that flower, cut, flip, 4.5, cut, flip. Now I'm going to go back to 2.25 to find that center of the flower, but this time I also need to line up this bottom. So you can either pick a set of dots or a line, whatever's easier for you. That should be lined up on the bottom, and your 2.25 should be in the center of your flower. And that way you'll have a perfectly fussy cut flower in the center of your square, if you have a defined focal center. Perfect, right? Now, I love this print. I love it, but I can only take 4.5 inches of it, which is right here on my ruler. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. Yeah, it's right there. So I need to figure out how I can get the most of it in. And the thing that I have to remember when I'm cutting this is that of those 4.5 inches, only 4 will show in the quilt because I've got a 1/4 inch margin on all sides for my seam allowance. So I need to figure out where I want to have those margins. So I can play with this. If you're having a really hard time doing this, what I suggest is you take a piece of paper and you cut a 4.5 inch window into it, or even better, a 4-inch window into it, and then put it on your fabric until you find that right mark, and then mark your corners with a water-soluble pen, and then you'll be able to cut from there. All right, I'm gonna go with here. I'm gonna cut here, and without moving my ruler, I'm gonna cut across this way as well. And I'm not worried about this right here not being straight, because it won't be, because it wasn't against the ruler. Because I've got 4.5 inches straight this way and 4.5 inches straight this way, and I'm fine. So now I can turn this, line up my corner with 4.5 and with 4.5. All right, deep breath. There we go. That is my fussy cut flower. Now I have some negative over here and some negative over here, but I did that on purpose because those are where my 1/4 inch margins are all the way around. So that is the last of my cutting for the insides of the frames, and now I get to start cutting my frames. Now we're ready to start cutting our frame fabrics. We have our inner frame, which in the pattern is listed as light blue. I'm going to start by squaring off my end here. And the way you square off your end is, you can kind of see right here on the edge. I'll bring it up a little bit in the frame so you can see. Right here on the edge is my fold. And you're going to line up a line of your ruler with the fold, and then bring it across until all the way across the whole edge you have a little bit of fabric that you're going to be cutting off. And this is just squaring up our edge to make sure that all of our strips are going to be straight. There we go. So that's scrap. And now we can cut our strips. So we'll go ahead and follow the instructions. Each time we should be able to line up a line across the top up by our fold and this edge along here. And if ever we find that it's not quite lining up right, all we need to do is square up our edge again and we'll be all set. Okay. So once you have your strips cut, then it's time to subcut those strips. And subcutting means you're just cutting them down into smaller pieces. And for subcutting, that's when I like to use this smaller ruler. So starting with our larger strip, we're cutting this one into 3 pieces. And whenever possible, I do like to layer up my fabrics. So I'm going to square off this edge. And then line this up with the lines on my mat. And since we need 3 of these, I just cut one, then I'm going to open it up and cut the other. There we go. And now I will do the same with my other piece. I need to cut 2 really long strips. These are 24.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on my 0 line over here on my number 0. And then I'm going to cut, because they're folded in half, instead of 24.5, I'll be able to cut half of 24.5 since it's doubled, which is 12.25. So all I have to do is find my 12.25 mark. Double, triple check that I've got them lined up on the 0 and that this is 12.25 and that I need 24.5, and then I can just trim up. And that's the easiest way to get these long strips. And then I still have enough to get my other small pieces. There we go. Now I'll be doing the same to cut from my dark gold frame and from my tan frame. If you look at the pattern, you can see my dark gold and my tan here. And for this new version of the pattern, my dark gold will actually be what was my tan before, and my blue will be my dark gold. So the dark gold will be the tan, the blue will be what it says is dark gold. And we'll go ahead and get those cut. So the next one on the list, it says dark gold, so that's this big frame. I'm going to go ahead and get my blue and start cutting those. I've moved on to cutting the tan fabric. Well, it's tan in the cutting instructions, but it's this darker kind of gold color in the quilt that I'm making today. And the instructions have me cut for my 3.5 inch strips, one 22.5 inch, or two 22.5 and two 10.5. And depending on the fabric, and this is our Gallery fabrics, on the half, I'm getting 21.5 plus selvage. So I'm not quite able to make it to 22.5 for 2 strips with one of these strips. So I need two 22.5 inch pieces and two 10.5 inch pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my 2 strips and lay them on top of each other. And that way I'll cut first my 22.5 inch pieces and then my 10.5 inch pieces. So each strip will get me one 22.5 inch and one 10.5 inch, and that'll be perfect. So I'm going to cut off my selvages, and I know this is off the frame, but it's okay. I'm just squaring up and cutting off the selvages, and I'm going to go 22.5 inches all the way over here and cut that. And that way I've got my two 22.5 inch pieces, and then from what's left I can cut my 10.5. And that is super simple and done. Now, depending on your width of fabric, sometimes when you're cutting up pieces, you'll run a little short. And then what you do, so I still need two 2.5 inch squares. And so I just grab what's left over from when I cut my 3.5 inch strip, and I just subcut these extras down into 2.5 inch squares. So instead of cutting a whole nother 2.5 inch strip, go back to your scraps from your last strip and see if you can make do from there. And that's generally what we do. So different fabric manufacturers have different width of fabric. Generally, pattern designers run by either 40 or 42 inch widths of fabric, depending on how we're working and how we think the fabric's going to play out best. So just always go back to the last strip of the larger size, and you usually have some scrap there to be able to cut smaller pieces. So as you go along, you can just check on your sheet the cuts that you've made and keep on cutting on. Now all I have left is to cut my background fabric, and all of that gets cut really similar to the way that you saw all of the frames get cut, so I'm not even going to film that. You just need to know that it's glorious and it's lovely, and it's this Art Gallery Fabrics denim, and it's going to look so great as a background texture. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut this, and then I'll be back. Once you have all your pieces cut, I highly recommend that you don't stop there. It's so tempting to just put them in a pile in a corner and think that it'll all be fine. But since we're going to be spending the next 5 weeks together putting this quilt together, I recommend you get 5 of these reusable bags and put each unit in one bag. So next week we're going to be doing Unit A. So all of my pieces for Unit A are in here. Same with Unit B, Unit C, Unit D down here, and then I have my final borders and my backing and my binding fabric all in the 5th bag. So each week I'll just need to grab the bag that I need, and I won't accidentally grab the wrong size strip. There's a lot of strips going on in this project, and you absolutely don't want to be grabbing that wrong size strip when you're making this project, because it's a super bummer. I have done it. The other thing is that while you're putting everything in the bags, you're double checking that you have all the correct number of the correct pieces, and you're double measuring all those pieces. I found one that is cut a 1/2 inch too short, so I'm going to go ahead and recut that one and get it put in the bag so that I have all my pieces ready to go. And I'll see you right here next week to put together Unit A. Look, we have all of our pieces in the bags, and if it felt like a lot, it really is, but that's okay. The cutting is really the most tedious part of making any quilt, getting all those pieces cut right. And because you spent the time to cut them right and make sure they're right, you know that your quilt is going to be right as well. I'm going to see you right here next week, but in the meantime, go ahead and find me on Instagram if you're not already following me there. I'm Craftmoore, CRAFTMOORE, plus make sure that you are subscribed to this channel and have hit that bell so that you get notifications as soon as next week's video is up. And if you have any questions or comments, leave those below. If you haven't yet, give this video a thumbs up. That lets people know that it's an awesome video, and we'll have even more people joining us for this Gallery Wall Quilt sew along. See you next week right here.